let me just tell you who we have here. First, I want to take a lot of pleasure in welcoming the Borough President of the Bronx, Ruben Diaz, who's here. And people ask, why do we have someone from the Bronx? Well, this, as you may know, site has enormous regional connectivity in it. It's a lot of implications for the entire city, but especially for the way in which it opens up opportunities because, as you know, the Amtrak lines go over the bridge from the Bronx, and of course, Sunnyside is just well-positioned to improve a lot of connectivity for Queens and the Bronx, as well as for the region. So I'm delighted he came this morning here. He's been a lifelong resident of the Bronx, you know. He's not from Ohio or Iowa. So, you know, we banned the Borough President of Brooklyn from coming into the building today. We're going to give him a geography lesson. So in any event, I'm pleased that he's here with us. And I just want you to know that we also have, to show you how our balance, we have the committee board too, the chairperson, and I think this is important to me, Denise Keenan-Smith is going to provide a perspective on the community, which is very important. And while she's here, I just want to say we also have, I wanted to say something. I got up this morning, it's a true story, at 6:30, I had a phone call from Kathy Nolan, the assemblywoman from Sunnyside and from Long Island City, and she said, Mitchell, I can't be there because the governor is cutting the budget, he's slashing Medicaid, I have to be here to fight for New Yorkers. And I agreed with her. I said, you can do more good preventing damage in Albany than anywhere else. But Kathy has sent a staff person here. Of course, we have Joe Connolly, the chairperson, too, removed of committee board there. So I just want you to know she was very concerned, and this is a very important area. As you know, it has excessive amount of representation. Is that fair to say? We have Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez as a small piece. We have Congresswoman Maloney as a large piece. We have State Senator Gennaro, so they're not here, but Kathy Nolan is here in spirit, and I just want to convey that. And then I think it's important, to know that we have Nick Fuentes, who's the head of the Tri-State Regional Transportation Campaign. You may know him better before he took that job on. He was one of the moving forces behind the Riders Alliance. The Riders Alliance played a very important role in New York in organizing riders. You know, it's very easy to be organized if you're a bicyclist. There are only 100,000 or 150,000, but there are 5.5 million people on the subway, and Nick, with John Raskin, took on the challenge of organizing the subway riders, and they are not easy. And he gave them a voice and a presence. I'm sure the governor loves knowing when he goes to his offices at 3rd Avenue. They greet the governor every time he goes into work. It makes him really feel better and warm and welcome. And so Nick is, though, very important to this discussion. And so, you know, I want you to know we have a good group. But I've asked, even though he's from EDC, I've asked Adam Marr to come and give us a brief overview of the project. And I want you to know he's not going to be on the panel, but I thought we should have someone at least explain the site and, you know, some of the ways in which it fits into the overall city's perspective. Adam, I know you're injured. Do you want to speak standing up, or what are we going to do?
I'm going to stand. This is one way to ensure I don't take too long.
Everyone who came in should take a seat.
Plenty of seats back in this direction. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Adam Grossman Marr. I'm a senior vice president in the planning division of NYC EDC. I was very excited to be here this morning, and then Mitchell made that crack about Ohio, where I'm from, and then he made that crack about EDC, and now I'm starting to wonder, you know, as if this wasn't enough. But in any case, and in seriousness, I do want to say thank you to Mitchell, Sarah, colleagues at the Rudin Center for having us here this morning, and thanks to all of you for coming out. Also want to thank our distinguished panelists, Borough President Diaz, Denise, and Nick. This is going to be a great conversation. So I'm going to jump into a brief presentation to sort of ground the discussion, talking a little bit about Sunnyside Yard and how the master planning effort that we're engaged in approaches and is thinking about kind of the big transportation issues facing Western Queens, the city, and the region. So first, just basic orientation. Some of you may know the Yard. It is located in Western Queens. It is about 180 acres in size, which is about the size of Governor's Island. It is largely owned by Amtrak. A sizable portion is also owned by MTA and the city. It was built in 1910, and since then it's served as really a critical piece of rail infrastructure on the Northeast Corridor. It is a very busy place. On any given day, There are a lot of critical rail functions happening there. Amtrak has over 800 employees and a number of important servicing facilities there. Many trains, including Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, and Amtrak, are stored there between the morning and evening rush hours. And then the mainline tracks that carry passenger service from Long Island and from the north into Penn Station and points west run through the southern end of the site. So this is really a critical and very active piece of rail infrastructure. And a large part of what our master planning effort has been doing is really looking in a deep and technical way at how you could build over this rail yard in a way that doesn't compromise its critical rail operations and functions. So the effort that we're currently engaged in and have been for a little over a year and a half is really thinking at a time scale and at a physical scale that we rarely have the opportunity to do in New York City. Because of the size of Sunnyside Yard, because of its complexity, because of the sort of diverse tapestry of very vibrant Queens neighborhoods like Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, Astoria that surround the yard, it's really an opportunity to think kind of in a visionary and very long-term way about the major challenges that are facing Queens and facing the city. And those include things such as open space, affordability, the need to grow an economy that is accessible to everyone, and of course transportation, which is what we're going to focus on today. So one of the things I think that is most interesting and most exciting about Sunnyside Yard is its incredibly strategic location within our transportation networks. The Yard is actually at the geographic center of the region, the largest urban region in the United States. It's also at an extremely rare point of convergence in our regional rail network. Simply put, all of the trains come here. Long Island Railroad, Amtrak, and actually New Jersey Transit come to the site today. In the not too distant future, after the Penn Access project is completed, Metro North trains will also pass through Sunnyside Yard via the Hellgate line. Now, none of these trains stop and provide passenger service today. But what this means is that with relatively little changes to infrastructure, without new tunnels or major new tracks, you could have access from Sunnyside Yard in Western Queens to basically every part of the New York City region, which could be an incredibly transformative thing, both for Queens, but also really for the way that New Yorkers move around the city, where they work, where they live. And that's one of the things I think that makes this effort so important. To really unlock the potential of this place, we need to plan proactively in a really forward-looking way. Which is why we are doing this master plan. So a few years ago, Amtrak came to the city and said, we have this huge site. We'd like to partner with you and really think about what its future could be, how we can protect it as an important rail complex, but also think about how it could better serve the city and the region. And so after doing some technical work to just understand the feasibility of decking over this rail yard, we began the current master planning effort, which has been going on for a little over a year and a half. I think there was a clear recognition that a sort of civic asset of this importance needed to be rooted in a really extensive and thorough public process. So we have spent that time doing a lot of public engagement, both kind of large public meetings as well as lots of small group meetings and interviews. And I think it's safe to say that transportation is one of the, if not the issue that has really risen to the top in all of those conversations. Almost everyone we talk to brings it up. That effort has also been guided by a steering committee on which actually Denise and Mitchell both sit, made up of both citywide and local Queens folks who have really helped to kind of guide this effort and ensure that we're doing a good job of public engagement. That committee is hosted by Deputy Mayor Vicky Bean and Tony Kosher, the chairman of Amtrak. It is co-chaired by Liz Luskin, head of the Long Island City Partnership, who's with us today, as well as Sharon Greenberger, who is the head of the YMCA of Greater New York. So the master plan contains multitudes. It has proposals around creating 60 acres of new open space for Western Queens, around building a huge number of affordable housing units. I'm not going to focus on those things today, but I will say that there are going to be several more panel discussions in this series. This is the first. The next one will be on open space and social infrastructure. It is next Tuesday, the 28th at MoMA PS1. I encourage all of you, if you're interested, to come out to that discussion. So today we're going going to focus on transportation. And we really think of this plan not as a sort of blueprint for development, not as a development project per se, but as really setting a guiding framework that lays down markers for what are the public priorities that need to be achieved at Sunnyside Yard. Or put another way, what would a plan worth doing look like? So what does that mean for transportation? So Sunnyside Yard, again, sits at kind of an extremely sort of strategic location. It is sort of at the intersection of all of our transportation networks, the subway, commuter rail, buses, vehicles, cars, highways. So again, we're really thinking of this as an opportunity, not just to plan for the Yard as a discrete site, but to really have a sort of think about the transportation future of Western Queens. It's an opportunity to really kind of look decades ahead and think about things holistically, again, in a way that we don't always have the opportunity to do. The way that we're sort of thinking about transportation, the way we've sort of broken it down is into kind of two categories. One is thinking about streets that put people first, that prioritize walking and biking, and then addressing our congested transit network and our crowded subway system and how we think about that network and how we can use the infrastructure that we have better and potentially add to that infrastructure. So to take the first one first, streets. One of the things that is really exciting about this planning effort is that we have the opportunity to sort of rethink some of the things that that we sort of take for granted in New York City, and one of those is our street grid and block size. So early on in this effort, we experimented and thought about a number of different sort of alternatives for how large the blocks could be at Sunnyside Yard. And we landed on this sort of 240 by 240 scheme, sort of following the Jane Jacobs axiom that smaller blocks are better for pedestrians because they offer more route choices and shorter distances between blocks. And so following that, we have created a flexible block network that uses the existing bridges that bridge over the Yard at Queens Boulevard and other streets to really create kind of a flexible armature that can sort of reconcile the different street grids from the old kind of farm villages in Queens and bring them all together in a way that really kind of knits these neighborhoods together. It's also a great opportunity to think about how our streets are designed. I think as a lot of you know and probably see firsthand, streets are incredibly contentious in New York when we want to make changes to them, and how that sort of scarce space is allocated. It very often turns into a fight. Here we have the opportunity to design streets sort of to really reflect all users and really serve all modes and kind of meet 21st century needs without having to sort of battle over every square inch. So what we have done is develop a family or typology of several different types of streets, and I'll go through each of those. This is sort of a menu of options. This drawing is a section through the site looking east. So on the left side is the north, and the right side is the south. So let me go through each of these in turn. The site would have a sort of central boulevard or greenway running through its entire length and kind of serving as its major central boulevard. This would be, I think, the first major street, wide street in New York City that is car-free. It would be entirely pedestrian and cyclists and really would serve as kind of a major open space for Western Queens, as well as kind of the grand concourse, if you will, of this new part of the city. Then the sort of network of interior streets is really meant to be sort of on the shared street model that you see a lot in Europe and other parts of the country, less so in New York City, that really prioritizes walking, biking, and kind of public spaces, but also allows for vehicles to access buildings and kind of, but really prioritizes kind of the version of streets that we used to have more of in New York City that are really sort of safe and comfortable for people to play and walk and be sort of neighborhood public spaces. And then we have two other new major boulevards called the Northern and Southern Corridor, because they would run along the northern and southern sides of the site. And these are really meant to be kind of 21st century complete streets that have separated and dedicated rights of way for buses, for cyclists, as well as for cars and pedestrians. So really kind of serving all modes. So now moving into transit. we kind of further break down our approach to transit into kind of two categories. One is thinking about how, through this long-term plan, can we reduce the number of people on our subways, which are overcrowded, and how can we also think about increasing subway capacity and making the system work better. So to take those in turn, thank you. The way that the plan is really thinking about this is sort of in a time scale from short to medium to long term. So today there are really critical investments that we are starting to make that are long overdue, such as the Fast Forward plan. The new MTA capital plan actually calls for improving, modernizing signals on all Queens subway lines, which is incredibly important. Moving forward in time, changes to our regional rail policy could be extremely transformative, particularly lowering the fare so that New York City residents can really kind of use our commuter rail system as a way of getting around the city and making better use of that network. And then another really important aspect of this, as the Sunnyside Yard plan starts to be built out, is really growing Western Queens as a job center, which is critical in part because it helps to bring people off of our congested transit system before they get into the Manhattan core. And also, as well as growing job opportunities for Western Queens and for the city, and creating a place where people can live and work within walking distance. So one of the aspects of this strategy is a concept called Sunnyside Station. This is not a new idea. It's been around for at least a couple of decades. It is a concept for a new regional rail station in Western Queens that would be located at the western end of the yard near Queens Boulevard. It would initially be served by Long Island Railroad. However, there is the potential for it to be served by Metro North, Amtrak, and New Jersey Transit, and really opening that regional access and access to the entire Northeast corridor from Boston to DC from this one place. And that could be done without building new tunnels or huge amounts of infrastructure, but simply by realigning tracks, building platforms, things like that. Part of the reason that the Bronx Borough President is here while I talk about a Queens master plan is because there's a really exciting opportunity to link the kind of growing job center of Long Island City to the Bronx through the Penn Access program that Borough President Diaz has advocated for. So, for example, if you live in Co-op City in the Bronx, you could access a job at an advanced manufacturing firm in Long Island City. If you are an institution like the hospitals at Morris Park, your workers coming from Queens and from Nassau and Suffolk counties could much more easily get to their job by transit. So again, has the opportunity to be really transformative in terms of where jobs are located, where people can live. And it's a concept that the plan really embraces and believes should happen early in its implementation. It also has the potential to serve as really an exciting civic space, something that downtown Long Island City doesn't really have in this way today. It could serve as sort of the anchor for a new civic square, kind of almost a Bryant Park for Long Island City that would bring together new housing and commercial space at an educational and research campus, the station, and several acres of new parks, all adjacent to downtown Long Island City. So finally, thinking about the subway network. So again, if we think in this sort of short, medium, long-term way, today there are these critical investments that are being made. Looking a little farther ahead, there is the opportunity to do things like introduce open gangway cars that can increase capacity on the system. But then looking even further ahead, thinking about now that we are making these sort of overdue investments and rebuilding our system, it's time to think seriously again about increasing capacity. And again, because this plan is so long-term in scale, thinking 50 to 100 years into the future, it really makes sense to get started early and think about a new subway line for Queens, as well as other improvements like lengthening platforms that have the ability to introduce new capacity. The idea of having a new line in Queens, again, is not new. Going back to the Program for Action in 1968, there was the idea of creating a super express that would come from the 63rd Street Tunnel via the main line and tracks actually passing underneath Sunnyside Yard. That right-of-way has been preserved. And there is an opportunity for a new station at Sunnyside at the southeastern portion of the yard. So this would certainly be helpful to developing Sunnyside Yard, but kind of more importantly, this would create new options for transit for Queens residents. And if we want Queens residents to be able to transition away from using cars to using transit, we have to provide those sorts of opportunities. This is something that won't happen quickly, but again, if you look at any subway line or indeed any of the kind of big enterprises of the past, planning started early. So one of the things that we are saying in this plan is that there should be a serious analysis of alternatives for what that subway line is. There are a number of concepts that have been out there for a while. We should begin to really seriously study and understand which one of them is the most optimal. So finally, what does all this mean and how much of a difference would these different interventions make? So one of the things we have done kind of behind the scenes is develop a flexible transportation model to understand and really analyze in a quantitative way how growth in Queens will impact our transit networks. So this is an analysis of just the subway system that we did, looking at demand or ridership today and anticipated growth. So the bar on the left is demand plus growth that we believe will happen in Western Queens, as well as growth that could happen at the Yard, which you can see is actually a fairly small percentage of that overall growth. And what you can see essentially is that existing capacity can accommodate most, but not all, of that growth. We have divided the interventions that I just talked about into kind of a couple of categories, more moderate ones, which would be things like CBTC improvements that are happening today, as well as more ambitious improvements like open gangway cars on all lines, and then the new subway line that I spoke about. And what we really concluded is while existing capacity can accommodate most of that growth, if we introduce and start planning for those improvements that I talked about, we can really have a system that is not just kind of struggling to keep up with demand, but is actually ahead of it, which is where we want to be. And finally, looking at not just subway, but all of the interventions that I talked about, we did a similar analysis looking at sort of frequency of crowding today and what that could look like in the future with these improvements. A few takeaways from that. Creating a new subway line is definitely the most impactful of those things that we could do, but creating more alternatives to the subway is really important. So Sunnyside Station is a piece of that, having a more rational and fair regional rail policy and fare would be another very important part of that would work hand in hand with the Sunnyside Station. Also creating new bus rapid transit. The plans northern and southern corridor would have dedicated rights of way for new BRT line into Midtown. And finally, again, really thinking about land use and encouraging bike use and continuing the trend that we have seen of mode share shift to bikes. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the panel and to Mitchell for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I've not heard the word finally used 6 times. You know, we have a 10-minute limit on speaking, but I think the EDC has I guess they have the right of overseeing that. But I think we should know that I often believe that elected officials should be the first person to speak because they are elected, you know. And so I've asked the borough president of the Bronx to speak, and then Nick, and then Denise, but I want to have discussion, so I just want you to know, if we can kind of keep it to about 8 minutes tops, then we'll be back on schedule, I hope. So can I ask the borough president?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I think Adam said it all. We should just go into Q&A. Thank you, Adam, for that wonderful presentation. I bring you greetings from God's country, the Boogie Down Bronx. It's great to be here. Thank you for allowing us to be part of this conversation. A couple of things here, and I'll try to be less than 8 minutes. Number one is I am not a transportation advocate or, well, in the true sense of the word like Nick is, or a transportation expert. And I am not a resident of Queens. I am, however, here to give you the reasons why I support this from my vantage point, from the work that we've done in the Bronx. When we speak of transportation alternatives, expanding transportation options, we often speak of it because we know that New York City, the greatest city in the world, continues to expand. And oftentimes that's sort of like this, like this concept, and folks really don't have a nuanced, a detailed vision of what that looks like. So from my perspective, let me just tell you a little bit about the Bronx and what that means for us and how the Bronx is a part of this New York City expansion. If you did not know, at least since I've been the borough president over the last 10 and a half years, the Bronx has seen a turnaround. I'm not saying life is perfect in our borough, but what I mean by that is 20 billion private dollars invested in our borough. 20 billion private dollars invested in our borough. Over 45,000 units of housing in the last 10 and a half years alone, in the Bronx alone. All kind of housing, from deep affordability to home ownership and everything in between. Over $400 million in public investments of our green spaces, our waterfront, and our public parks. Over the last 10 and a half years alone, we went from 14% unemployment to about 5.2, 5.3. Over 117,000 more people are working today in the Bronx than the first day that I took office. This is the largest workforce participation in the history of my borough. And because of that, we've seen, what other people got to understand is, while you may not believe this from what you read in the media or see in the media, we've been the safest in the Bronx since 1951. Even last year, you look at the top categories of crime: homicide, shootings, shooting victims. While the city went up, the Bronx went down. The media doesn't give us credit for that. If we had contributed to the uptick in the rest of the city, you certainly would have known that the Bronx is a contributor to that. And so that is allowing for more and more people to come to the Bronx. We continue to grow. We were probably one of two, I think three of the boroughs who increased in population over the last census. We're going to continue to see that in the next census. Because of that, people are investing in our borough. Because of that, jobs are being created in our borough. And so when we're dealing with all of this, transportation and alternatives to transportation has been at the forefront of our conversation as to how we continue to progress, and then how do we have that connectivity to other parts of the city. So yes, we've been advocating so that we have ferry service. We have our first ferry station, and we're working on our second one. Yes, we continue to work with the New York City Transit Authority and MTA so that we can have alternative bus routes and rapid or express bus routes to continue. We have the bus redesign plan working with Andy Byford. We have the BRT so that we started in areas like 161st Street, of course on Fordham. If you did not know this, one of the worst things to do in the Bronx is to try to get from the east side of the Bronx to the west side of the Bronx. BRT is allowing for us to do that. We've been able to work with the state, thanks to Andrew Cuomo and the legislature. We've seen probably the largest state investment in our borough, and I guess over the last 50 years, with the Bruckner-Sheridan interchange. We already have the Sheridan Boulevard, and now we're going to flyover so that we can get those trucks that are going in and out of Hunts Point. And we could talk a little bit about that on Q&A if you like, so that we can get them off the streets. But roadways and that infrastructure, we have to continue to invest in those areas. And then, which leads me to the Metro North stations. The Metro North stations is an idea that I wish I could take credit for. It's been kicked around since before I was born. When I first got to Borough Hall, all I did was dust it off with my development team, James Rouse, which is here, as well as Alex and others. And we dusted it off, and we tried to make a real strong case to Metro North, to MTA, to the governor, and we succeeded. And so the Metro North stations are 4 Metro North stations along the eastern corridor of the borough, and they're now fully funded at about $1.3, $1.4 billion. And we're waiting now for the LIRR to get their slots on the east side access so that we can get some of the Penn slots, the Penn Station slots. But as you continue to look at the city and how do we expand, we have to really plan. And so the reason why I support the stations at Sunnyside, and B, the decking, is because it makes sense. This is a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer for not only New York City, but the entire region. It's a no-brainer because it's a way for us to be able to have people go from the Bronx to Queens and not have to go into Manhattan, no disrespect to Manhattan. It's a way for us to connect the different boroughs outside of Manhattan, being that when you look at job creation and job opportunities and job growth, it is happening more in the other boroughs than it is in Manhattan. So could you imagine, and Adam said this earlier, but in the Bronx we have the Hutchinson Metro Center. It continues to grow and grow and grow. We have the 911 emergency call center there. We have everything from a world-class hotel, which is the Marriott Residence Inn, that's always fully occupied. But so many things are coming there. We have a biotech center. We have different city agencies there. They just won an RFP. There was an RFP that was put out to build out 2.2 million square feet. And we're going to have colleges and med labs there. So could you imagine somebody from Queens being able to come into the Metro Center? Could you imagine somebody going vice versa into Queens, or being able to go to Hempstead from the Bronx without having to get into their cars and do that in under an hour without having to go into Manhattan? Could you imagine somebody being able to go from the Bronx all the way to Washington, D.C. on rail, and doing so by taking the Metro to Queens, to Sunnyside, and transferring over to the Amtrak? In terms of platforming, well, I remember back in 2016, we identified 3 rail yards in the Bronx. And we've seen platforming here in the city of New York. We've seen Hudson, but that's been a little pricey, and it's priced out New Yorkers. We could do platforming in a way where it's equitable for the city of New York. And because of the plan that we put out, we even saw that the governor put out an FEI for the Harlem rail yards. And so when you look at platforming, I believe that this can also serve as a catalyst, and I don't want to get into the details of what the community may or may not want on top of the platforming. The fact that we've been able to have this conversation now with a lot of community input, I think it goes a long way in showing folks that we are planning with a purpose, that we don't have to plan for the press conference, that we're planning for 40, 50, 60 years down the line, and that we can do so in a way where we plan for the entire city of New York and not just in our own individual community silos. We could unite the city on so many different fronts, and this plan right here, or at least the starting of this conversation, does exactly that. It will not only benefit the local community there, it would benefit the rest of the city of New York and the entire region. I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Borough President Diaz. I want to say we want to move along. I just want to also say I noticed Sharon Anderson from Borough President Melinda Katz's office is here from Queens, and also I think someone from Congressman Maloney's office is. Thank you very much. Which I appreciate the fact that the key people who will actually we're counting on Congressman Maloney, obviously chairman of the House Oversight Committee, to deliver vast amounts of federal money. And so yeah, that exactly. Well, you're in the majority of the House. There's absolutely every reason she should be money in Queens and not on the Upper East Side. Let the pandas stay in Manhattan. Let the rail go to Queens. In any event, I'm very pleased, though, to bring our next speaker in, Nick Fuentes, who's really been the moving force behind the Rise Alliance, but he's now running the Tri-State Regional Campaign. I think Nick could give us a sense of how Sunnyside fits into the region, but also, as the Borough President said, how it fits into kind of the way in which it helps commutation patterns and travel patterns within the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, so Tri-State Communication Campaign has been around for about 26 years, and we focus on New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, so we really do kind of take this regional approach to transit throughout the entire metropolitan area. But it's not just us that have been spending a lot of time thinking about Sunnyside Yards and what the potential is there too. Everybody from NYU to RPA Yard is this like linchpin of what regional transportation could look like in the future. And so I think that speaks to the importance of what could potentially unfold here. And the other thing I think that's really important is we've reached this moment right now where the kind of long-term thinking that we've been lacking for an incredibly long time is actually starting to happen. Everything from obviously the MTA's current capital plan, which is just looking at the next 5 years, but is setting us up for communications-based train control on a number of lines, including throughout basically all of Queens, to the rollout of Omni, the new fare payment system that you all have seen now, the little, you can tap your phone and get into the system. It's more than just that. It actually is an interconnected system that'll eventually work with Long Island Railroad, Metro North, the buses, and can even intersect with New Jersey Transit and beyond. So you've got Penn Access coming online, which we've talked about quite a bit. You've got East Side Access, you've got Third Track. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, there we go. Okay, much better. I hope everybody can hear me better now. So all of these programs right now that are doing a tremendous amount to both expand the regional capacity and secondarily that are allowing us to think long-term about what kind of expansion we're going to need in the future. Now, there are other projects, of course, that are a little bit delayed, Gateway being one of those. There's certainly others I can talk about, but that focus is actually starting to come to bear. And for that reason as well, Sunnyside Yards, I think, plays a critical role in the regional transportation of our future. And the important thing I want to point out here is that, the current status quo is just a missed opportunity. And so whatever happens at Sunnyside Yards now, 10 years from now, 20 and 30 years from now, is likely going to be far better than what we currently have. And so we can leverage that opportunity to not only make sure that we have a station directly at Sunnyside Yards that services the people that live there, but that actually expands opportunity for everybody in the region. If done correctly, if done in concert with New Jersey Transit, if done in concert with the MTA, it really opens up the kind of opportunity where somebody living in Maplewood, New Jersey can take trains in and have a one-seat ride directly into Queens or vice versa. It really does a tremendous amount to open up the region. Again, the problem that we face is making sure that elected officials, planners, and stakeholders are all collaborating, working together, and finding a way to speak collectively to one another. I say that Sunnyside Yards is this tremendous opportunity, but right now we're also looking at expansion plans at Penn Station. Those expansion plans at current time don't include a through-running model that would, I think, expand on the capacity of Sunnyside Yards. So, we need to make sure that these conversations are happening collectively, not just in the local communities in Sunnyside Yards, which is incredibly important. I don't want to discount that at all, but regionally, citywide, and even having conversations with our neighbors across the river and beyond. But the reason that is so important is because Sunnyside Yards, unlike so many other development projects, really does touch on so many lives and have so much potential to unlock an economic engine in the region. So enough about the regional applications of Sunnyside Yards. I also want to talk a little bit about what it can do for local transit. And we spent a lot of time talking about the subway improvements that are happening now and the potential for further subway improvements at Sunnyside Yards. I do think it's incredibly important to underscore that, like as somebody who rides the trains, we all do in this room, we know that, commuting during the day, especially during peak rush hour times, you're often in very, very crowded trains. A lot of the conversation around the proposed air train extension, or the air train at LaGuardia, is that the 7 is already at capacity. So we need to get serious about capacity concerns on the subway. CBTC, Communications-Based Train Control, is certainly very helpful. That allows trains to run every 60 to 90 seconds. That does promise a tremendous increase in capacity. And then also doing open gangway, which can add 10 to 15% capacity, is another way to do it. But we're not fully going to get there unless we get serious about ancillary transportation. So what are we doing on buses, especially BRT and SBS, and improving surface level transportation, including biking and micromobility? The Sunnyside Yard plans have gone a good way, I think, towards making that a real possibility for folks. And the last one I want to raise before we move on, just in the interest of time, is the complete streets model that we're talking about here, I think, is an incredibly important one, and one that is in short supply outside of Manhattan. So the opportunity to really redesign streets around people, around micromobility, and around surface level transit, de-emphasizing the importance of the car, I think would take us a long long way towards a place that felt like a community, but also functioned just much, much better for transit. We know right now that the core problem we face on our streets is essentially a problem of congestion and a problem of geometry. There are only so many cars you can fit on the roads, and yet we've allocated a tremendous amount of our street space to either driving or parking vehicles. A plan like this, done correctly, can really reorient our streets in a way that make it much safer and much more accessible for everybody. So, we're excited about the potential here. There are obviously lots of conversations to be had over the coming years, but we think that, this is a really good start at looking at a spot that has tremendous opportunity and starting to leverage that for the local community and for the region at large.
Thank you, Nick. I just want to say it's really important, I think, to understand that the purpose of our program today, and I really appreciate EDC's active involvement in making this happen, is to generate an awareness of what can be done at this site that serves the community, the city, the region. I appreciate the fact that it's not a single purpose subway station. It's not just an Amtrak station. It's not just rail for cargo. This is a vast part of the city which I think has great opportunities, and it's going to take much more careful planning. We don't want to kind of have it just serve, we don't want to duplicate Hudson Yards in Queens. We only need one, if we need one at all. Anyway, let me do.
Sorry.
Denise Keenan Smith was the chairperson of the Transportation Board of Community Board 2. She's been secretary of the board, and most important, she has an advanced degree from NYU School of Engineering. So that's a secret weapon.
Shameless plug, yeah.
Denise?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here. We're very excited. And I really would just like to share that Community Board 2 really sees this as a golden opportunity for the local area. We have advocated for many years, decades, in fact, for a Sunnyside Station, East Side access. Just a couple of weeks ago, I saw Carolyn Maloney, who was shouting, "Resolution, write that resolution for the Sunnyside Station." So we're really excited about it. And, as you all know, Long Island City is the fastest growing neighborhood in the country, and it's no secret. And we're just continuing to develop. Some believe maybe has already been overdeveloped. And unfortunately, the infrastructure was not put in place at the time when that was occurring to ensure that we did have transportation and sewers, et cetera. So now we want to make sure that we get it right, or as right as we can be, and engaging in this process early on, I think, is very beneficial. Some of the things that we're also doing is, you might know that there's a waterfront project going on that was initially supposed to be primarily housing, but we're kind of encouraging the developers now to maybe look at more commercial development down there, which could create jobs in that area. So we see this, Sunnyside, Woodside. Woodside is expanding as well right now, especially along Queens Boulevard. So the 7 train, as you well know, the E train, they're really at capacity. And we see that the Long Island Railroad in particular is a great opportunity for people coming from parts east. Flushing, for example, maybe could get some, Long Island Railroad could help get some people off the 7 train. So we're excited to be here. We think this is a great opportunity. I'm not going to talk about decking or affordable housing at this point, but for the station, we definitely are in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad. I appreciate that. No, I think that, I think what's interesting is how much Queens and the Bronx are, now at a point of takeoff in different ways. As you may know, warehouse space is in such demand in New York, you can't even get a warehouse in the Bronx anymore. I think that Amazon and Fresh Direct must have taken over everything along with Jet.com. So, the real estate dynamics of the city have changed dramatically, as well as where the jobs are. I just want to say, the borough president mentioned about connectivity. I have a person who works at NYU. She drives every day from Throgs Neck to avoid the tolls. Thank you, Governor. She drives on the Bruckner into Manhattan, the 3rd Avenue Bridge, down over the 59th Street Bridge to get to work at the Department of Health and Mental Hospitals in Long Island City. Do you understand that commute? And, the point I'm making is that having a Bronx-Queens connection is going to make both areas stronger, because you then, once you have mass transit or any kind of commuter rail, your job choice is multiplied. It's not just one set. You have a whole set of opportunities, and I think it's important to understand that transportation is key for economic mobility, because it gives you choices of where to work, not just going to your one local area. Anyway, let me do this. I want to invite your comments, your questions, and I really want you to, the most important thing is identify yourself first so that we can turn this into the CIA later. Yes?
I'm Jim Burke, transportation activist in Queens. I grew up in the Bronx. I love the Bronx. Then I moved to Queens, and I had to commute between North Central Bronx Hospital, where I worked, to Jackson Heights, and then later Rockaway.
So how'd you do it, by kayak?
Well, I don't drive, so I had to do it with this.
Drone?
I had to actually do it with so many different buses and trains. I had to take the Bronx 10 to the QBX1 at that time, which is now the 44, all the way to the 7 to come. It was really a big pain. This is amazing. I still like to go back home and visit friends, and right now it just takes so long. And so this would be amazing. I might not make it to 2050, so I'd like to start on this right away because I think it's an excellent plan. And thank you.
We're going to guarantee you'll make it to 2051, yes. Lou-
My name's Lou Venage. I'm a retired transportation planner and a Sunnysider. There's a lot of positives here, but one thing's missing. The ability to exploit the regional rail potential of the yards and a Sunnyside Station depends on protecting the flexibility and efficiency of the existing rail operations in the yard, and also as a long-term issue, expanding rail infrastructure to support expanded service. That's something that's not part of active collaborative planning among the railroads, and as presented today, EDC's long-term transportation goals don't include any specific reference to that. How is the city and the other responsible parties going to add that concern to future planning, looking ahead beyond the approval of this plan, and ensure that that doesn't take a back seat to development over and around the yards? Sorry, took a little explanation.
I would like to invite you to a planning session. Yeah, I think I've learned, I've been chair now for about 4 years. I've been on the board 8. I think it's so critical that we engage the local community in the conversations. We're seeing that in the bus network right now. People are very upset, and it's not even a finalized plan. So I would like to encourage you, as we move forward with this, with EDC and the other city agencies, to participate with us. We listen. We really do. We really take the time to listen, and I think that's a good point, and honestly, I hadn't thought about it, so I appreciate the feedback.
Yes, if you,
Good morning. My name's Nuala O'Doherty. I also live in Jackson Heights. I'm on the community board for 3, and I'm also on the Community Education Council for District 30, which is all the way from Long Island City to Corona, 39,000 kids. As a 7 train rider, whenever you think about putting another body on that train, I just cringe. When I hear about the air train plans, I just cringe. But I see this great potential that people in Queens could go to Sunnyside and go to Boston, could take the Metro North, work in the Bronx, go to Philadelphia. What I'd like to know is this something that we could ever see in this lifetime? And what is the scheduling of this? Is it building the transit first, or are we going to go like we did in Long Island City and build the housing first and then try to catch up on everything else?
Just a couple of thoughts here. Number one, you said you grew up in the Bronx and now you're in Queens. It's great. The city always benefits from what I call the Bronx diaspora. So in the near future, we've been working on this. I think that what we need to do, aside from rail, is also expand ferry services, and also look at the routes, the ferry routes. So I think that there should be more ferry routes directly into Long Island City, into other parts of this, into Brooklyn. I would love for somebody to be able to go from Throsneck and Ferry Point Park to go all the way to Coney Island, a family, or for somebody from Coney Island to be able to come to Orchard Beach and not necessarily take their cars or be on the train for 2 hours. I think it's quicker to get to Albany via car than it is to go to Orchard Beach from parts of Brooklyn and other parts of the city. With regards to your statement, the beauty about our 4 Metro North stations is that the tracks are already there, and it does not contend with any of the existing rail. It doesn't. It will. It will not exacerbate, and it's actually the opposite. The more that we expand and the more that we create this sort of symbiotic relationship between Queens, if we do this at Sunnyside, we will alleviate the 7 line and other lines, and then we will be able to see, and working with the MTA and the state in the 5-year. Remember, when I was in Albany, I was a member of the Assembly. I was a member of the Transportation Committee, and I sat on the Transportation Conference Committee. So the 5-year capital plans, quite often we think that, we want them to continue to fund the MTA and transit, but it's almost like a drop in the bucket, and commuters really don't feel it. But what this will do, it would open up an entire universe, especially since we've been financing and funding and speaking of rail in silos, LIRR, Metro North. So what we want ultimately is to have the city ticket become a reality and permanent throughout the city of New York. In terms of your point on what should come first, I think that the station needs to come first for a number of reasons. Number one, we cannot continue to waste any time. It benefits so many people almost immediately. Number two, I know that Denise doesn't want to speak about platforming, but platforming, I think, needs to happen in many parts of the city. In the Bronx, if you look at Hostos Community College and Lincoln Hospital, I would love to platform that whole area there. Ultimately, when you look at the city of New York moving forward, we have to create space and land where currently it doesn't exist. What happens on the top, leave that to the local community. You can do park space, green spaces, you can do commercial, and so on and so forth. But, and I'll stop here, but the reason why I believe that the train stations need to come first is because once you do the train station, everything will fall into place, and then you have leverage over potential developers so they can be active financial partners in whatever it is, whether it's commercial, residential, even public spaces. But now we can leverage that so that developers, and not, the expenses doesn't fall just on the government or whatever, but have the developers work with us. So if the public park needs to be done on top, let them also pay for it.
I want to add one thing to this conversation too, and that is that, I think the elephant in the room here is the MTA. And the elephant in the room is this. It is that the MTA faces a massive operation shortfall in the coming years, growing to as much as $1 billion over the next 3 years. And the challenge here is this. The 7 train has CBTC. It's still a nightmare, right? But it's also not operating at peak capacity. We could add more rolling stock, and we could add more engineers to have more trains actually running and maximizing the potential of the investment that we've made that everybody suffered through multiple years of construction on, right? But in order to do that, we need the rail cars, and we need to make sure that the operations funding is there. The MTA needs to find efficiencies to get there. We're also probably going to need to look at additional support. I think the nexus here is, the opportunity in the nexus is city ticket and making sure that people can access LIRR and can access Metro North for the same price as a subway ticket or close to. That's the thing that's going to relieve capacity on our overcrowded trains when people have that option. But in order to do that, we need to increase capacity. The commuter rail is currently running at about 98% capacity. But as we bring on more rail cars and more engineers, that really does open up some of that potential. But the MTA has got to get it right. That being said, I don't think that's any reason to not look at doing these kinds of plans. If we say we can't develop in New York anymore because our transit system is a nightmare, we're shortchanging ourselves. We need to fix the transit system first, and that should be priority number one so that we can have this kind of development. And one good thing that we've talked about that you just brought up as well is using value capture as a means to do this. If you look at SL Green and the new tower that they're developing at Grand Central, they put $200 million into improving the Grand Central Station. That kind of value capture model expanded upon actually really does have potential to raise revenues for this. We need to do it better than we've ever done it before, but I think it's within the realm of the possible.
Well, first, let me say I agree with Nick. I also want to point out that the most powerful person in the state legislature is now from the Bronx. And so you have a strong borough president and you have a speaker of the state assembly. It's a very tough combination. And I really want to point out that, no matter what the MTA is or isn't, one of the reasons the Rudin Center is a great champion of taking cannabis revenue and using it for mass transit is because it's the operating funds that the MTA needs. And, I think we can get more money from weed than from real estate development, on the short term at least. In any event, I just want, we're going to update our report soon, but I think you should just know that there are a lot of ways you can get funding into the MTA. It's how it works when it gets there. Are there any other comments in the back? I want to make sure. Yes. Wait. I don't want another white man. We want to have some diversity in the questions, okay? Are there anybody else? You can ask them. Okay. Give them the mic. And
Okay. I was like, where am I going?
Hi, I'm David Krulich. I'm a property owner in Sunnyside and former employee of New York City Transit as well. The 2020-2024 capital plan has $0 allocated for the Sunnyside Station, and it's not a priority for the MTA at the moment. What needs to be done to sort of get this at the top of the heap for them to get funding and get the station built?
That's a really, Nick.
So-
Borough President.
I know a little bit about this because I've worked on 2 capital plans while I was up in Albany. The one thing about 5-year capital plans is that they're not really
They're
etched in
10-year
stone.
plans.
They're not etched in stone. But what needs to happen is for there to be for instance, the 4 Metro North stations. They weren't part of the previous 5-year capital plan, and we were able to get at least half of it. I would think $700 million in. You got to have the political movement, the organization. You got to have the clamor. You have to have the community involved. Once that happens, then as they continue to deliberate up there, you can then have it. You know, they can amend it. They can reallocate. They can take from here to there. But there has to be a level of advocacy that I don't believe that the legislature is feeling right now for Sunnyside. So they're hearing from about other areas. We were able to do that with the 4 Metro North stations. I mean, when the Metro North and the governor's folks first came out to Co-op City, in the first meeting, we had a series of meetings. The first meeting, we had about 900 people come out. And then we were able to get all of the elected officials at every level of government sign on to a letter and calling the governor. It doesn't hurt that you have the Speaker of the Assembly, who's also from the Bronx. So once we started doing all of that, then money started getting allocated into the 4 Metro North Station. So this is what has to happen for Sunnyside.
Yes.
I'm Debbie, and I'm a longtime activist. I remember coming to Long Island City, and then we found out the soil was contaminated, and we split. I don't think we should, all those partners that are partnering should not make not one more move until you really come up with some affordable housing for people. I mean, people participating in their own death. Yes, it'll be cool to make $200, $300 more a week because you're able to get to this job. I guarantee that you'll work that job less than 3 years after that, and they're going to throw you out of that apartment unless you own the house. And you're just not going to have a place to live. East New York, Bushwick, Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, these people that have put their life into New York and made it what it is can no longer live here. And that rail, to me, just looks like another playground for the rich coming. And, you know, it's all good to be able to get to all these places. But it's also good to be in the middle of nowhere where no one wants your little stinky apartment. I remember you could get an apartment in Queens, Corona, $300. This was the 90s still. $300. Forget about it, baby.
Let me say first, I think there's no question about the need for more housing. We have added 125,000 jobs.
There's a need for more housing. There's a need for more housing, yes. And there's a need for housing, period. There's a need for people to stay in that place and pay what they pay. Everybody has a right to live somewhere. This is a no-brainer. This is participating in your own death when they come for you. And as soon as they build it, it will be in a matter of 5 years guaranteed.
Well, let me just say that if you want to really add to the housing stock, which I think is the problem, the pressure on the housing stock comes from this inability to build sufficient housing. One of the ways New York has always built housing is by building transportation, which makes the land attractive.
Where they are first. Let's start with that. And you're not just going
But if you would allow me for a second, I can't see. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't. You're behind the pillar, so I can't. I can't.
Just so you know.
Hi. So I think, and this weighs heavily on me every single day, especially representing one, if not the most challenging part of the city. Yeah, but so the way we've been able to deal with this, even before the rail, right? Look at the city of New York, you had the right to counsel, that we were part of that campaign so that people under a certain income level can have free legal services when they go to housing court. If you look at some of the reports now, it's working. I know. Well, hold on. Let me just address your concerns. Because in the Bronx, we've also done, as I stated when I first started out, over 45,000 units of housing, all kind of housing, deep affordability, home ownership, and everything in between. What we also need is not only so we've done everything from certificate of no harassment, which to sort of simplify it is like a letter grade for property owners who may want to do something with their property if they have too many complaints against them, then the city will hold that against them. And so all of that is happening. When we did the rezoning on the Jerome Avenue corridor, we started the first pilot program in certificate of no harassment, and hopefully now that will be the norm as we do development or rezoning throughout the city of New York. So we've been taking several measures to make sure that at least in the Bronx, if you look at the Bronx, as best we can, we've learned from other boroughs. We learn what works. We learn what can work even better. So when I say planning with a purpose, and when I say we want people to do business in the Bronx, I also say we want people to do business with the Bronx, not just in the Bronx. And that has to be a part of the entire city. With regards to this specific site, or even talking about the transportation alternatives, there are a lot of folks who are struggling to make ends meet. And I think that it would serve them well to be able to have access to jobs that pay a little bit more.
Sure, but only for a little bit of time.
Not necessarily.
5 years after you do this.
Not necessarily.
So many
And
times.
you know what else just going back to what,
Just Hudson Yards. These people get a little apartment that nobody wanted next to the Irish bar on like 38th Street. When you come out and there's a dead body or whatever, and you can't anymore. It's that simple.
so we have to learn those. So we have to learn those lessons, and that's why this is a conversation, thanks to everyone who's here and folks out in Sunnyside. This is a conversation that we're starting now, right? So this is a conversation. This is not going to happen in 5 years. Some people may wish that it did. At least the train station, I certainly would love it, but it's not. This is why we have to have this meaningful, purposeful, continuous conversation. But I'll tell you one thing about transportation and what it means to poor people. What it also means to poor people, besides speaking of dollars and cents, is the most precious thing in the universe, if you ask me, which is time. And so what we need to do is create an avenue so that as people are getting to and from work or school, that they have the ability to do so in the quickest, most expedient way possible, so that ultimately they have the time to spend with their families, to go to work and be underground for an hour and a half one way, which makes it 3 hours back and forth of your entire day, and not spend quality time with your family. That, to me, even more so, is more hurtful to people who are poor. I beg to differ. When you
Like the Long Island Railroad, it's going to be for the executives to get to their
not if we do it the right way. Not if we do it the right way, and not if you continue to be as forceful. No.
50 years, I'm waiting for the right way.
Well, look at what's happening in our borough.
I'm beginning to look my age. It's steady.
No, you look fantastic. You look great. If you look at Hunts Point in the Bronx, the people in the Bronx and Hunts Point, they've been waiting for something like this, and they're not rich people. If you look at Co-op City, where it's working middle class, for the most part African American, they are waiting for something. In the numbers that have been coming out in our meetings, what we still need to do is not rest on our laurels. So if you and others continue to come out with your passion, with your vision, voicing your concerns, I believe that the time has come. The zeitgeist of the city and throughout the nation has completely changed. People are now starting to make decisions that benefit everyone, not just a select few. I think we could do that here.
I want to thank the borough president. You know, first of all, I want to say it's a joy to see an elected official answer questions and have a discussion. It really is. I want to say something. I appreciate you came here because you did better than any academic could have ever done. We have a timetable. I don't want to keep you with our, but we have room for one more question if there's someone who has something that. Okay, so let me say something. I want to thank the members of the panel. I want to thank EDC. I want to thank Sarah Kaufman and the people from Casira, but I just want to thank everyone for coming. I think you realize two things. One, we're not going to solve the housing problem this morning, and we're not going to solve the transportation problem, but I think that Sunnyside can help do both. And I really want you to know that, I think those of you who are worried that it's going to happen overnight, rest assured, it takes 18 years from birth to finish high school. It takes 50 years for the Kansas City Chiefs to get to a Super Bowl. We'll be somewhere in between. Thank you very much.